Hello, our Truth Warriors. Well, today we have two guests who have been well recognized in the fight against tyranny. With the alerting of viral isolations and freedom of information requests, right through to quite the controversial situation with court cases and a shift in the truth movement. It's time to set the record straight and move forward together. Welcome to the Atlantic Underground podcast, Pat King and Christine Massey.
Good afternoon, good evening.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys, for doing this. We really appreciate it. So to start out, Christine and Pat, I'd like to, if each of you could maybe just give us a little background on yourself and why you've decided to challenge the mainstream narrative on COVID-19. And I'll start with you, Pat.
Well, basically, it started with the holes in the story. The way it started right from the get-go, and then the constant targeting and harassment that we received for just wanting to ask questions. It became very personal in the latter part of this year, in December, when I lost two of my close best friends to suicide with regards to what happened with COVID, them losing their jobs, divorces, things such as that. And so I became kind of a voice for people to understand, like, you know, you're not alone. We want to ask these questions. And I was asked to go around and speak at different engagements across Canada, at different events, at different protests across from Montreal all the way to Vancouver. And I took part in these things, and it kind of snowballed from there. Then it came down to, in my own hometown here in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada, I attended a rally, and Red Deer has been known for the longest rally across Canada, where we were 3.5 years strong, ever since they shut down our oil and gas industry. And Trudeau put in the mandates for Bill C-48, C-49 or 69. And that's the anti-pipeline moratorium and the anti-shipping moratorium with regards to getting our products to market from Alberta. So I've been a loud advocate within regards into my own industry. When we did that, I attended a rally, and I was speaking at this rally to try and, you know, educate the people there and let them understand where we stand on this stuff and how we can all stand together and fight back. At that time, on December 5th, I was given a ticket for $1,200 for being in a group larger than 10. And that was the contravening of Section 73, subsection 1 of the public health order here in Alberta. When we looked at that, there was a bunch of things that happened. They were blocking me out of court. I was getting targeted harassment from the RCMP. I was getting threatening drive-bys by the RCMP officers. One in particular, Constable Hinisich, who was the lead investigator on the day I got my ticket. This man is an actual tyrant. Like, he is an actual, he's threatened terrorists, like he's a terrorist. And I couldn't understand why, when all I was doing was asking questions. So I got together with a group of people, and we started doing some investigating and some researching. And lo and behold, we came across a document. That document was a federal government document from a Freedom of Information Act. And the lady's name was Christine Massey. So we vetted the information, and we looked it all up, and we researched, and everybody got a hold of this lady, and the lovely lady here in the room here tonight is the one and only Christine Massey. So we used that document to formulate our own group of questions to understand exactly what she had done. And what she had done was absolutely amazing. And once we had it vetted and we knew this was good and we knew it was the proper information, we steamrolled it. And we got together with doctors. We got together with Lawyers for Truth, Ethics Over Fear. These are doctors that are being discredited, threatened to be having their degrees and PhDs taken away from them, as well as lawyers being threatened to be taken off the bar. Now, these lawyers are mad. These doctors are mad because they have a Hippocratic oath, and a lawyer has an oath that he takes. And they said, we're not going to stand for this. So during the time we worked with them, we formulated these questions. And the questions were, we wanted to see the isolation of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Now, as we further research, and these doctors confirmed, who are virologists, immunologists, biologists, who are professionals in their field, confirmed that this virus has never been isolated. And once we found that out, we knew that we could get this into a court of law with our tickets. And the reason we could do this is under the self-representation. And that's why I took the lead on this, is I self-represented myself in the court because I have more rights than a lawyer does if I go into a courtroom under self-representation. And those rights are this: the judge now has to advocate for me to steer me in the right, correct direction to get through the law system. And when she does that, she has to tell me the right ways of doing it. Now, when we did it with the court proceedings, there was some hiccups, there were some procedural violations, the jurisdictional violations. We made mistakes. That's what happens.
Yeah.
But we were paving the road for everything that was coming.
Yeah.
And I think we were 100% successful, albeit, everybody's trying to take it out and saying, well, you didn't win. You didn't win. That's right. I didn't win. But what we did was phenomenal. And on the record, it is in the transcripts that they do not have the isolation of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Now we are being...
Before we
go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Before we go on with that, let's get Christine to introduce herself and tell us a bit about herself.
Yeah.
And then we're going to get straight back into that, Pat.
Okay.
So, my name's Christine, and like Pat was saying, right from the beginning, the story of COVID wasn't making sense. It wasn't adding up. And I was looking at it like most people, trying to make sense of the statistics and why are they making such a big deal of this, and why are they just taking China at their word when they're pulling people off the street and saying it's because they're trying to protect them from a virus. It didn't make sense to me. So luckily I had been following John Rappaport for years, and I had already heard about the PCR test. So I started learning more about that. And then eventually I came across the work of Dr. Andrew Kaufman, who had done a couple of brilliant presentations where he was explaining the isolation issue. So after I had seen those, that the lights started coming on, things started making more sense. And so I thought, wow, this is really important, because what he was saying was they haven't isolated the supposed virus. And if that's the case, they haven't proven that there's a virus. So I said, okay, wow, I better do my own due diligence and look into this for myself. So I started looking at the papers, because there's lots of papers published saying that they had isolated the virus. And there's Canadian paper, there's one in the US, and of course from China and other countries, Australia, Korea, what have you. So I would look, the problem is they will say in the title that they isolated the virus, and they'll say it in the abstract that they isolated the virus. But if you actually read the methods, as Dr. Kaufman was explaining, you find that they did something completely different. They didn't isolate anything. And when I'm saying isolate, we mean purify, get something by itself. So supposedly there's this virus going, we're all spewing it everywhere, and we're such a danger to each other. And all these people are dying because they got infected with the virus. But then it turns out they never actually find this virus in any patient sample.
Yeah.
And they don't purify it. And that matters, because if you're actually a rational person and you're actually doing science, you would want to get a purified sample of it, and then you could extract the genetic material from it and sequence that, so you would know that the genetic material is coming from that specific thing that you think is a virus and is causing people's disease. And then you would characterize it, figure out all the various properties, and do controlled experiments with it. So the whole idea of the controlled experiment is you have two groups, and everything should be the same in both groups. So you're controlling all the other factors that could influence the outcome. And then you have that one thing that you're interested in investigating in the one group and not in the other. So that way, if you find a difference in the two groups, you can attribute it to that one thing. So it needs to be purified, not a soup of unidentified God knows what.
Exactly.
So if nobody has ever even purified, they haven't done those other steps, because it would require the purification.
Yeah.
So I saw in the studies that, as far as I could tell, Dr. Kaufman, and there were other people too who were talking about this, and I saw that they were, the papers were confirming what they had said. And then I thought, well, okay, that's really important. So I had used Freedom of Information in the past on the fluoride issue.
Yeah.
Because for years I was a safe drinking water advocate focused on fluoridation and trying to prevent that.
Yeah.
So I had done Freedom of Information requests asking various Canadian institutions before if they had any studies showing that fluoride exposure was actually safe during pregnancy with respect to IQ and ADHD symptoms in their children. And the reason I did it was because there were government funded studies indicating the exact opposite, that it was not safe. So it was a way to show, they don't have any studies to show that it's actually safe, even though they've been telling people for decades, safe and effective, safe and effective. So I said, okay, I can do that sort of thing again here, ask them for records describing purification of the virus. And I wouldn't just ask for records where they mention purification or isolation, because then we'll get all these bogus studies. So I worded it very carefully, and I watched Dr. Kaufman's, the section of his presentation where he said, this is how you could do it, but this is what they're actually doing. So I watched it, and I tried to get the wording so that I would weed out all the nonsense studies and only leave room for legitimate ones. So I started submitting, and the first one I submitted was to Health Canada. And then I gradually, I didn't know it was going to turn into this big project, but I gradually started submitting to more and more Canadian institutions. And eventually I got a response from the National Research Council, which might be the one that Pat had seen. And so I put it on my website and was sharing it on social media, and gradually started getting more responses from more Canadian institutions. And then gradually people started noticing, and I didn't know all this was going on with Pat. I had no idea that he was looking into it. I only came across Pat when the rest of the world did, or most of the rest of the world did. So, and I'm so grateful to what he's been doing. So,
what we'll do there, Christine, we're going to come back to you in a second on this.
Okay.
We've got some quite pertinent questions that we'd like to go through
Okay.
with you. But I'd like to speak to Pat now and say, Pat, as we spoke a little bit earlier, the opportunity now is here. We're going to certainly try and straighten things out and put some new things on the record for everyone. There's been quite a bit of controversy on many platforms about the muddying of waters within the truth movement, and a few people have spoken out against you. Would you like to set the record straight and give us an honest and final overview of what's happened, and let's get it out there for everyone to hear?
Absolutely. Where do you want to start? There's so much, there's so many people. There's so many people who want to think that they have an opinion to this, and that's fine. Everybody's allowed to have their opinion.
I think after the Stu Peters one was probably when some people kind of
absolutely. And like I've said in every interview I've done since then, I am not responsible for what another journalist or another podcaster puts in their title. I'm not that. I don't have a say in that.
That is
so
true.
People want to listen to that and think that I'm the guy that saved the world and I'm the guy that saved Alberta. Well, you're absolutely wrong. It's what somebody put in their title.
Yeah.
What I did though was I did, and I don't believe in coincidences when it comes to politics. I have been at this since February. My first court date was February 3rd. We've been at this information and attacking Deena Hinshaw and attacking the Alberta legislature and the Alberta government and AHS with these questions. We've been after them for the longest time, and Alberta's been leading the forefront in all of these COVID restrictions. We have been the one that's been, the most laxed in all our restrictions. We have people, even during the height of all of it, walking around with no masks and people telling them to shove it. And we were on the streets, thousands of us on the streets every weekend here in Alberta. And when we got the opportunity to subpoena Deena Hinshaw and provide these documents to her, they were backpedaling. First, she locked me out of court on May 4th. She locked me out of the courtroom. The only person, and I'll give you the rundown how that happened. So I gave her the subpoena. I filed for the isolation under Schedule A in my evidence package. The isolation of SARS-CoV-2. And like Christine said, we were very precise in what we were asking for. And immediately once she was subpoenaed, 4 days later, I'm locked out of the courtroom. And how come? Who's the only one who can do that? Deena Hinshaw. She's the one that puts the restrictions in. So they were like stumped. Then we waited and waited and waited and waited and waited. And we tried to get her again. Once we got her again, they waited until the last minute to do and it was actual procedural violation of what they did. They subpoenaed me on a Sunday morning at 11:53 in the morning. I took a picture of the process server serving me the subpoena. Now I have to be in court on July 19th and behind closed chambers to quash the subpoena. Now we go to quash the subpoena. We also ask the judge, well, they say, and everybody's a lawyer now. Okay. So now all of a sudden we do this, and now everybody's a lawyer. Everybody knows what they're reading, and everybody understands what they're reading. Next thing, I'm getting hit by JCCF, and JCCF's trying to discredit what I'm doing. Now I'm getting hit by Rebel Media, and Rebel Media is trying to discredit what I did. Now I'm getting hit by the PPC party that, I didn't do it correctly. Doing it correctly and doing it incorrectly was not ever the case. What the case was getting this information into a court so that we could get it on the record. And that is what we did. Now, there's a lot of questions, and people are saying, oh, the CMOH doesn't have to provide you that material. Yes, they do. And they did. And not only did they do that, the judge even stated, and this is why these transcripts are so important. And this is why I'm still being dicked around for these transcripts, but we're seeing some headway, because once it comes out, people then can pass their judgment at that point. We have media groups such as Rebel Media doing a half-assed report with only half the truth. We have JCCF, who is threatened because they have been taking everybody's court cases and everybody's tickets and fighting for it. But in the underlying clause in their contracts that they sign with these people is when and in time that this becomes a civil lawsuit, JCCF is now going to get all the money for what they're doing. They're taking everybody's tickets and they're getting all the money, and whoever had the tickets, they're never going to be able to take them into court because they signed this contract. You see, what we did was we basically exposed what they are actually doing. Now it gets even better. And this just came out last week when I was in Montreal with a protest of over 300,000 people. We have Maxime Bernier on a hot mic, openly admitting that he was the one that called JCCF to get them to do what they did. He's the one who called Rebel Media, and he's the one who got everybody on it. But then he openly asked me, hey, Mr. King, I want your transcript so I can help me in my court case. They know what we're doing. They know what we've done. And this is just opposition, just trying to continue the narrative on, because they need this to keep going. Rebel Media needs their donations. They need their hits. They need their ratings to go up. JCCF needs people to keep coming to them so that when this does go to civil lawsuits, they're going to make a freaking fortune. And the PPC party, every candidate across Canada originally was asking me to help them and join them and get in on this when I did what I first did. But I don't trust any politician. I never have. How do you know politicians lying? His lips are moving.
Pat,
So
has
here we are.
The hot
Here
mic
we
you
are.
were talking about just then, has that been released? Have people heard that now? Is that out in the public arena for people to hear and see, or is it a recording, a video recording?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I have it right now. I can give it to you too to put it in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be good to hear
have.
that. Yeah, it'd be good for the show
Absolutely.
notes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what Rebel News and some of these other places like the JCCF, I think what they were kind of alluding to was just the way that you went about this when you went to court on your own. And they said there was procedural stuff that was wrong, with the subpoena, the justice of the peace. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
All right. So there's your first procedural violation. Under self-representation, the judge has to advocate for you. I've mentioned that earlier. When the judge advocates for you, she has to direct you in the right direction to go on about this. She gave me the wrong directions. She sent me in the wrong way. And when the justice of the peace signed my first subpoena, they knew what they were doing. Remember, these guys all play in the same sandbox together. You think our judicial system is for the people? It's not. They are all protecting everybody. So we were able to uncover a few snakes in the grass when we did this. Now, when I filed for the second time, for the second subpoena for July 21st, which was actually served on July 14th, when I went in to get the justice of the peace to sign that subpoena, she openly stated to me right in the courtroom, "We're very well aware what you're doing, Mr. King." I said, "I know you guys are." And at that moment, she should have told me, under her laws and under her rules, she should have told me I'm a justice of the peace and I do not have the authority to file this paperwork. But she did not. And now there's a complaint filed into the Alberta court system with regards to the misinformation and the misguidance of a justice of the peace. And this is not over. This is just getting started. There's a lot of things that transpired from all of this. But the kicker was, and here it is. Now, the chief medical officer of health does not have the material evidence to provide. Now, they can take that in one way. You can take that in a legal standpoint. You can take that in a misinterpretation of the verbiage. But what you don't get, and this is why why the documents and the transcripts are being held back, is because I actually go and ask the judge, Your Honor, on and for the record, I just want it stated that the chief medical officer of health does not have the isolation of SARS-CoV-2 in their possession or in the possession of the Alberta Health Ministry. And the judge says, yes, Mr. King, you are right. They do not have that evidence.
But now
And
let me
you
stop you there for a sec. Now, when I was watching the Rebel News with I can't remember her name, the gun lady there,
Sheila Gunn.
Sheila Gunn Reid.
Yeah.
She was saying that the material aspect was because it wasn't relevant to your ticket specifically.
It was absolutely relevant to my ticket, because then I'll explain to you why.
Sure.
Under self-representation, I have the right as a citizen of Canada to address my accuser and cross-examine my accuser. My accuser is Dina Hinshaw. Dina Hinshaw is the creator of the public health order, of which I was violating and which I contravened under Section 73, subsection 1. So it says, I, Dina Hinshaw, formally write this public health order under the pandemic of COVID-19. So therefore, she wrote this public health order under the science that she knew of COVID-19. Well, now we're going to ask, how are you able to write that public health order if you've never had the science for it? So we are challenging the public health order. Now that is where I made the mistake.
It should have been a charter challenge.
It should have been a challenge to the Public Health Act, is what it should have been.
Okay.
And that's okay. That's quite all right. Yes, I did it wrong, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We learn from our mistakes. And that is what we did. And I set the foundation now for the next set of people coming into this to take what I started with, take what I've done, and elaborate more on it and move up on it. And why are these politicians not asking these questions? Why is it some oil and gas professional in Alberta who had to ask these questions? Where are our politicians? Where are our lawyers? Where are everybody who needs to be asking these questions?
Yeah.
They're not doing it. So you know what? I took it and I ran with it.
Yeah.
And it was not without, it wasn't like it was something that I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this. I was really nervous to do this. I was really scared because I know what comes from this. And I have to thank Christine, because if it wasn't for Christine, I would have never came across this stuff.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to see if it would work, because everything else that everybody was doing wasn't working.
Yeah.
And for one guy to give it a shot, it's like the game of a battleship. All right. You say E4, that shot goes out, but it misses. But you know that you're close to the boat. So the next shot that comes out is going to be the bow shot. And that's what's about to come out. And you've got people around the world now understanding exactly what I did. And they all understand. And I'm going to set this straight right from the beginning, even on Stu Peters' show, even in the original video that was done, where I'm standing outside the courtroom and I'm talking about this. I tell everybody I didn't win. I put that straight out there. And I've said it. I felt a little defeated, but I know we're not defeated, because in the court of public opinion, that's what matters. And that's how we need to push this. And we need everybody to understand that you can do this too.
Yeah.
So we have them on the record. This is why the judge is not, or the court system is not releasing July 21st transcripts. They are scared shitless. They know that this is in there and they can't get away from it. They cannot erase this from the transcripts.
It also has to be something where people are not in fear of challenging this.
That's right.
And you know, maybe what you're saying here now will encourage people now to move forward and encourage people to address this themselves and continue to fight it. And, you know, as you say, if there's stuff on the transcript and there's been precedent set in regards to, you know, having something on the record there, you know, learn by what's gone on there. And then the next people that can take the baton and continue should be able to deal with that. Now, talking about passing the baton, I'm going to jump back to Christine now. Now, Christine, we always come under heavy criticism from people when we discuss the details about how it's not a virus taking lives. Now, lots of people know people who have had this as the cause of their death, but what would you say to all the people out there, what the people are actually dying of right now?
Well, I would say that it's correct to say nobody has had it, because there's no it. All of the science, because the foundation are these isolation papers. This is where they claim to have identified a new virus. And I challenge anyone to look at them and try to make any sense of them. They don't make any sense. They're not, virology is not a science, is what I will say. So the whole foundation is fraudulent. You can't test for something that doesn't exist. You can do a fraudulent test, and that's what they're doing. They're doing tests that are completely meaningless. No COVID-19 test has ever been validated or could be validated because you don't have a sample of the virus. You haven't proven that the virus even exists. So all the data is fraudulent and meaningless, and all the diagnoses were fraudulent and meaningless. And all they have done is distract from whatever people actually did have. And people, I guess, because they had this idea that there was this one thing responsible for all the COVID-19 cases, they keep wanting to ask, well, then what is it? There is no it. It isn't one thing. Just imagine you randomly grabbed people and got them to take some stupid, meaningless test, like pick a number between 1 and 1,000. If you pick the one that's in my head, you're positive. Like, that's how ridiculous it is. So, and some of those people would be sick, and it would be for all sorts of different reasons, right? It's meaningless. So people always died. People always got sick. People always had respiratory illness. In Wuhan, this is China, and Wuhan in particular is known for, they have horrific air pollution. It was so bad for years. People have been protesting, and you take your life in your hands for protesting in China, but that's how bad it is. Like, and this was no secret. And apparently they have a huge problem with pneumonia in China. So, it's just ridiculous. So, and we know that most people who test positive have no symptoms or very, very mild symptoms. It's not a severe acute respiratory illness to begin with. So, yeah, I would say every illness and death for people who actually have been sick, they need to be looked at individually, like always. Like, that's what should always happen when a person's sick. You look at their history and their exposures, what's been going on with them, and you figure it out. And I'm not everybody's doctor, obviously. I don't have these answers. So that's something that would have had to been looked at in a case-by-case basis. But what I will say is this whole thing about viruses and pandemics being blamed for a lot of illness means that, well, it serves many purposes, but one thing it does is take attention away from all the real causes of disease, many of which come down to things like all the toxins that we're exposed to that are in our food and in our water and in our air and sprayed on us and coming at us from different angles. And I'm not saying that's the only thing, because there's stress and there's malnutrition, but when you have horrific air pollution, for example, and people are getting severely, sick from that, blaming it on a virus takes the attention off the government's responsibility to try to keep the air clean for people and hold responsible the companies that are polluting the air, that sort of thing, right? So, so that's what I would say to that. Stop thinking that it's one thing. It's not one thing. You have to understand everything is meaningless. All the tests, all the statistics, stop trying to make sense of it. There's no sense to be made of it. Just none, zero.
Yeah. Now, Pat, I'd like to get back to you if we could. Basically, I've been told that you have a background in occupational health and safety. So you were saying earlier, before we went on the air, about that you have a professional set of questions that you for people that maybe their employers are going to go after them for having the vaccine. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that, and just maybe like how this document could help them out?
Absolutely. So yeah, I hold a degree in occupational health, safety, and environment. I'm after my name, it's like a doctor. It'd be Dr. So-and-so PhD. Well, mine's Patrick King, CSP, Certified Safety Professional. I worked for years in a corporate office here in Red Deer. I looked after 5 branches in the United States, 3 branches here in Canada when it comes down to the safety protocols, guidelines, and I design, implement, and mandate all the safety protocols, PPE, and things that you need to wear, and you need to keep yourself safe and keep workers safe. In that course, I took an ethics. I took a code of ethics to make sure to always protect the worker, and the worker first and foremost. And the worker is what comes first, or else no business is going to be able to be prosperous or profitable if their workers are not in a state of safety. So when we do this, we look at all this mandates and we look at what's going on, and this is what's called informed consent. And we looked at a group of what here in particular in Canada, and how the government is trying to roll out these mandatory vaccines. First of all, it's not law. Mandatory is not law. Mandates are not law. And people need to understand that. That's not a law. And what we're going to show people, and what we've been working, it's gone absolutely viral, is we actually have OSHA, which is the equivalent of OH&S here in Canada, in the United States. And under OSHA has already put out a report stating to all employers that they will not be responsible or compensating any workers who suffer adverse health effects from these mandatory implementations of vaccines for your employees. That's right there, red and white. So their compensation board isn't going to compensate, and their onus is going to come down onto the employees. Here in Canada, we have a government putting the pressure on these businesses because the government of Canada understands that this is 100% illegal. They cannot force you to take a vaccine. So now they're putting the onus on the employers. So now the employers just want to keep their money coming in, and they're going to implement these vaccines and make sure that they're following their guidelines, or the government's going to threaten to shut their businesses down. You got to understand, this is all part of a larger scheme. There's something else that they're doing. So under my guise and my professionalism, we worked together, me and a couple other people, and we decided, you know what? We got to protect these workers. This is our job. This is why we went to school. This is why we love what we do, because we have the ability to make sure that each worker goes home at the end of the day with all their fingers, all their toes, and they're healthy, and they get to see their families and they get to enjoy their life. So in doing so, we wanted to make sure that we can bring this up to everybody. And what the questions basically are and how they go is, understand this. We're not telling people not to take the vaccine. We're telling people that they're going to take the vaccine, because they don't want to lose their jobs. So they're not going to go to the boss and say, hey, you know what, boss, shove it up your butt. I'm not going to take this. And what it is a potential COVID vaccine and the desire to be fully informed and appraised at all the facts that before going ahead and taking these jobs. And basically people are just going to ask, you know, I want to know what are in these. And every worker has the right to look at the SDS sheets of any chemical they're working for or working with to understand the safety measures, the PPE protocol, the contents, and what it's going to do to your body and how it's going to harm you. So number one question is, you know, can you advise me of the approved legal status of any vaccine and if it's experimental? We already know they're experimental. They are not FDA approved. So right away, the employer is going to be like, oof. And the employer's duty at this point is to inform the employee exactly what they got to put in their bodies. The next one is provide details and assurances that the vaccines have been fully independently and rigorously tested against controls groups and the subsequent outcomes of these tests. This is exactly what Christine said. You know, it backs up what her findings were under the Freedom of Information Act. Can you also advise that the entire list of contents of these vaccines and the ingredients of them are toxic to the body? And that is the SDS sheets. And we found out some of the ingredients in these. SM-102 is one of the ingredients, and it's the number one carcinogenic to the human body. And it's not even supposed to be, the human body is not even supposed to come into contact with this. Then you ask again, you know, can you confirm that these vaccines are advocating is not experimental mRNA gene altering therapy? We know they're gene altering therapy. These aren't vaccines. Then you ask, you know, confirm that I will not be under duress from yourselves as my employers in compliance. Can you also advise me that the likely risk of fatality should I be unfortunate to contract COVID-19, because we know workers or people who are getting these vaccines are actually contracting COVID-19 after they get these vaccines. It's all been in the news, and it's nothing new. And then it also goes into more detail by saying, once you've received the above information in full, and I am satisfied that there's no threat to my health, I will be happy to accept your offer to receive the treatment, but under certain conditions. Now, this is where OSHA steps in. When OSHA says that they're not going to cover any adverse health effects, you say, you confirm in writing that I will suffer no harm. So you get your employer to openly state that, yeah, this is good for you and I recommend it. Now that onus goes on to the employer. It opens the door for civil lawsuits when the adverse health effects come down. And then B, following acceptance of this, the offer must be signed by a fully qualified doctor who will take full legal and financial responsibility for any injuries occurring to myself and or from any interactions by authorized personnel regarding these procedures. And the last one is, in the event that I should have to decline the offer for a vaccination, please confirm that I will not compromise my position and that I will not suffer prejudice and discrimination as a result. I would also advise that my inalienable rights are reserved. Now this falls under the play with the right to refuse unsafe work. And now workers can now address their employers and say that their employers are putting them in a position that is unsafe. And that opens the door for the workers to be empowered and know that they can fight back on this, and they have grounds to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to take this.
So if the workers there had this set of questions, I mean, we're seeing it right now. We've just seen the 5 top banks today say that all their workers have to be vaccinated. And we're also seeing everything through the government and any affiliates of the government also having to follow the vaccine route as well. So, you know, this set of questions could legally obligate the employer, and they could be in a position. Is this like a contractual agreement where they are obliged to answer these questions prior to pushing forward with forcing employees or coercing employees to take the vaccine?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the number one question. And what you're doing now is you're empowering the people. And not only that, you're also saving the employer, because now the employer is going to look at this and say, you know what? Oh, wow, this is not right. We should not be doing this to our workers, because now we're going to lose our business if something happens. So not only am I helping the employees, I'm also helping the employers to save their butts, because what's happening is, you see, this is all part of a bigger design. And the design is to bankrupt businesses. And now this is going to happen. And the businesses are going to be banked. This is part of the Great Reset. You have politicians openly stating this, that this is the Great Reset. Build back better. That's the whole thing. They want this to happen. They want the businesses to tank. And then they can start implementing what they've been waiting to do for the last 50, 80 years.
Yeah.
I also want to bring up the point that under the Nuremberg Code, which is something that a lot of people are forgetting about, that we've gone through this part of history and what these tyrants did to the race of Jewish people in World War II. And it's always the number one part in the 10 points of the Nuremberg Code. You know, voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. You need voluntary consent to do any kind of experiments on anybody. Well, you're not getting voluntary consent, or you're not getting voluntary consent. You're getting people scared that they're going to lose their job. You're getting people scared, families scared that they're not going to be able to educate their children. You're getting people scared that they're not going to be able to go to the grocery store to get food. You're scaring the shit out of the population of people, and this is wrong. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with people asking questions to their governments. And that's the whole point in this. Since when did the worst thing a government can ever say is, I'm from the government and I'm here to save you. That is so wrong.
Yeah, Christine, I'd like to get back to you for a moment. I'd like to ask you a little bit more about your freedom of information requests. So what institutions and countries did you hear from with these freedom of information requests? And basically, I think you said earlier that the ones that did say that they had isolated, you had kind of saw through that, and they, maybe it wasn't really true isolation. So maybe if you could kind of touch on that a little bit.
Right. Yeah, so we now today I received the 30th response from a Canadian institution.
Yeah.
And I could read you, if you don't mind, I could read a list of the institutions.
Yeah, sure.
One nice thing about freedom of information in Canada, at least in Ontario and at the federal level as well, I'm not sure about other provinces, is it says in the legislation that if an institution, if they're refusing access to records, they're supposed to state explicitly if there is no record, they're supposed to say so. And if there is a record, but they're not, if they're withholding it, they're supposed to cite the provision in the legislation that allows that. That's a really good thing, because we've had many institutions around the world that will come back and they'll cite or provide studies, one or more studies, or refers to websites. And they never contain any description of an actual virus being purified.
Right.
So, and they can get away with it. And I don't know the legislation inside and out for all these other countries, but as far as I know, at least in some countries, they can get away with that. So
Did you have to pay?
Canada,
sorry. Just did you have to pay for these for them to release
in
this
Canada,
information?
that's another. In Canada, at least in Ontario and at the federal level, there's a $5 application fee.
Okay.
And then if your request involved a lot of search time or a lot of photocopying or printing out of physical pages and shipping, you could get charged. It would depend. I have never had an issue with that. And we know with this, they don't have any records. So if they give us anything, it's not even something that they should have given. And so, no, I don't run into those issues, but it would depend on your request. It could happen.
Yes.
I think it may be something like if it's going to cost over a certain dollar amount, maybe $100 or something, then they give you an estimate so you don't get surprised and stuck with the bill that you can't pay.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the nice thing is in Canada, if they have no records, they're supposed to say it. So I have had a few where they tried to, actually I had one institution just mail back my check and they tried to give a casual, oh, you should ask somebody else about this. But then I can respond and I explain, the legislation says this, that's not one of your options. So in Canada, we actually have now 29 institutions out of 30, just admitting flat out they have no records. So I've heard some people saying, in response to what happened with Pat, that, that issue where they're saying it's no material evidence. Oh, that doesn't really mean they don't have the isolation of the virus. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, it does, because we already knew that anyway, right? Pat's just getting them on the record in court and going that route. So we know for a fact, because I'll read you the partial list, but the more key institutions from Canada: Health Canada, which authorizes the injections; the National Research Council of Canada, which Dr. David Martin has been talking lately about a BC company named Cuitas, I think, Cuitas, something like that, Therapeutics. And they actually were the ones that developed the lipid nanoparticle technology. Well, the NRC brags about how they provided them guidance and financial support for 5 years to get that accomplished. They have no records.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Do you mind if I read through the list?
Sure.
This was for
Quickly.
the lipid nanotech, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
This was for the development of the lipid nanotech.
Correct.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it was two companies there, wasn't there, that were involved with it, and obviously there was a lot of Canadian funding from the current government
Justin
to,
Trudeau openly
Yeah.
funded it.
He was involved.
to
Yeah.
allow
we
this
heard
to
that.
happen. Yeah, and now they're reaping the benefits because it's basically insider trading. Yeah, go ahead,
So then we
Christina.
have VIDO Intervac, which stands for Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization - International Vaccine something or other center. That's at the University of Saskatchewan. They had publicly claimed to have isolated the virus, but they have no record. And I'll just point out too that in our information, all the ones that I did and colleagues who use my wording, we always make it clear we're not just asking for records that your institute authored or describing purification by your institute. We're asking for any records that you might have downloaded or printed out or someone handed to you, anything that you have in anything held by your institution. So it could have been authored by anyone in the world, and they have nothing. The University of Toronto, McMaster University, Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto, and Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center. And those four are key because they're the other group. Researchers from those four institutions had claim to have jointly isolated the virus, and they actually published a paper on it. And we get a lot of people sending me the press releases or the paper and saying, what about this? What about this? But it's just another one of these studies. If there's time, we could go into what they actually do in these studies, but they did not purify anything. They didn't do anything remotely scientific.
What about Koch's postulates and how it applies in this situation?
Well, it's interesting because if someone like Pat or I bring it up, the first thing we'll do is get shot down. Koch's postulates don't apply, and they make us sound like we're stupid. But the thing is, it's true that in a strict application of Koch's would not be possible if there actually was a virus, for two reasons. And one is that Koch's postulates was originally for bacteria, and so it talks about isolating from a patient the thing that you're interested in that you think might be the cause of disease, and growing it in a pure culture. So that's one of the things people say, oh, you can't do Koch's postulates because a virus can only grow in cells. And that's true. And then the other reason would be strictly according to Koch's, one of the steps would be once you've purified this thing, you would introduce it into a healthy host and then see if it causes the disease. But it's considered unethical these days to do that in humans. We do that on other species, which I don't necessarily, I'm not on board with, but this is what's done. So it's true that a strict application would not be necessary. We know that. My requests are not for anything to do. I'm not asking for Koch's postulates to have been satisfied. I'm only asking for the purification step. So, and another thing is to keep in mind, it's funny because for both the alleged imaginary SARS virus and this imaginary SARS-CoV-2 virus, there are publications by virologists claiming that Koch's postulates have been fulfilled.
Yeah.
And we have emails from an Australian virologist who was involved in the Australian paper where they claim to have isolated. A colleague had an email conversation back and forth, and I have the emails. I put them on my website. His name is Dr. Jason Roberts, if I remember correctly. And my colleague had asked him, have Koch's postulates been fulfilled? And he said, yes, absolutely. And there's other people, so it's fine for them when they want to use Koch's postulates as it's fine for them to say these things, but if we even breathe a word of Koch's postulates, people are down your throat right away.
Yeah.
Let's see, the Canadian Institute for Health Research, the National Science and Engineering Research Council, the Ontario Ministry of Health, Public Health Ontario, which I just got a couple of weeks ago, and it took over a year to get their response, because that's the Ontario institution whose mandate it is to provide scientific advice and input to the Ministry of Health and the medical officers in the public health establishment in Ontario. So they had no records. And then we have the BC Ministry of Health. That was specifically for the UK variant. And all my more recent requests, since they came out with these variants, I'm always asking of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, any records describing purification, and that includes any of the variants. So if you have anything on any of these.
And if you can't isolate a
If you don't have
SARS-CoV-2
any of
virus, then how can there be a variant of something that hasn't been isolated?
Exactly.
So anyway.
I was biting my tongue on that one. I was waiting for you guys to ask that, because that is exactly what we were going for.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then the BC Center for Disease Control. And there's a document that they published in April of last year. I have it preserved on my website, where they admitted that there's no gold standard, which means that's a cute way of saying there's no virus. We don't have a sample of the virus.
Right. And there's never been a gold standard.
Their idea of a gold standard, they try to pass PCR tests off as gold standard. And then there's the BC Public Health Services, what is it called? The Public Health, this is in B, Public Health Services. Sorry, I just wrote down the initials, PHSA. And then we have the Newfoundland and Labrador Department of Health and the Quebec Public Health Agency. So they all admitted that they have no record of the virus having been purified from a patient sample. They would also have no record of it being purified even from a cell culture, but I didn't ask for that because to me, if you could only find something in the cell culture, which is where they mix the patient sample.
Right, it's
once
not even it's not relevant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I'll just mention too, so the other one that we have a response for is the Public Health Agency of Canada, which I, along with Health Canada, these are the two main institutions in Canada. And so what they did instead, I guess it was too awkward for them to admit that they don't have any records. So they cited a study that it was exactly what I had asked not to give us. And it's one that they funded. It's a study where they don't even claim that they isolated the virus. But what they do is that same monkey cell stuff. And it's a study where they were doing that, not to say we isolated the virus, but they were doing it to look at the relationship between, in samples that tested positive on PCR tests, they were looking at the cycle threshold, which is the number of cycles they had to do before they got that bogus signal, supposedly for the virus. They were looking at the relationship between that and whether or not they were able to culture the virus to get it to allegedly grow. This virus that they've never actually found in any patient sample. So that's what they did. And even when I wrote back and, just said, you just gave me exactly what I asked you not to give me. And this doesn't make any sense. And I explained it and it's all on my website. They just stuck to their guns and dug in their heels. And so those are the Canadian ones. And then we have the US CDC. We have over 20 countries now where there's ministries of health, departments of health, other organizations that had claimed to have isolated the virus. Nobody has anything. And we have over, with the one that I just received today, that will now make 95 institutions.
So all this freedom of information request and all this information, people can find all this on your website, Christine? Yeah,
I have one page. If someone goes to my website, it's fluoridefreepeel.ca. And it's FLUO because people often spell it OU. So it's UO. And someone made a tiny URL for me. So it's tinyurl.com/no record found.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you go there, that will just redirect you to the FOI page. So I have everything collected on one page so people can scroll through and find the links to the PDFs for each institution. So it's all right there in one spot.
Yeah. We'll leave that in the show notes as well after the podcast.
Yeah.
I want to just definitely address the monkey in the room here and how much of a superstar Christine actually is. And all the hard work. And I want everybody to understand all the hard work this woman has gone through to do what she's done for the rest of the rest of the planet. This is absolutely amazing. And Christine, you absolutely are the angel of God to do this for the rest of the country.
Here.
Thank you. That's really sweet. And like I said, I had a lot of help because there were people around the world that saw these. And, just like people are going to do what Pat has been doing. There were people who saw the freedom of information and they did their own. So I didn't do it all on my own. And then, of course, I learned from other people like Dr. Andrew Kaufman and Dr. Thomas Cowan and Stefan Lanka and all these people, and they learned from other people. So, yeah, thank you, Pat. And I love this man so much. I love you so much, Pat. You're my hero.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Chris.
I want to, sorry, Johnny, I just want to bring up something else that I used in my case. And this is why I did what I did, because a good lawyer always knows the answer before he asks the question. So we made sure we were fully informed in all of these findings to make sure that when we asked this question, it was going to be the shot that was heard around the world. And ladies and gentlemen, whether we won or lost, pretty sure that bullet's still going around the world right now.
But just because you lost, maybe we could talk about where you're going to go from here, and as far as an appeal and what other people might be able to do because of what you've done.
Absolutely. So the appeal process is going to be going forward. There's no question about it, because we have so many procedural violations, and it's open in the transcripts that people have at the ready right now. Those transcripts are available and people are looking at them and reading through them. And even the judge even openly says, yes, there was procedural violations. So yes, the appeal is going forward. We are not done. We're just getting started. as well as we have other people. And in the July 21st transcripts that we finally were able to find, that the actual courthouse put the wrong date on the transcript. Now that's why we weren't able to receive it under procedural requests. I wonder who accidentally put the wrong date on the transcripts so that the Freedom of Information Act couldn't find it and other people couldn't find it, but understand what sandbox we're playing in. As well as we have on the record these attorney generals from Ottawa that were present in the courtroom openly stated on the record that there are thousands upon thousands of tickets that are coming up in the next few months, and they are going to be the results of those court cases will help determine Mr. King's court case as well. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to call it as it is. These guys are running scared. They know that we have given all these documents to every other person out there. They know what's going to happen, and they are trying to get behind it. So what do you see? You see the Alberta Health Chief Medical Officer of Health rescinding all restrictions on COVID, and they want to treat it like a flu. You know, they want to look into the investigation of SARS or COVID-19. They know what's going on. Look at the 4 presidents who denied the vaccine mandate, and now where are they? They're dead.
But I just want to interrupt you for 1 sec. But Alberta did bring back for, I think it's for 6 weeks. They did bring back these restrictions, right?
Why though? Because she's looking into the investigation of the COVID-19 virus in Alberta. So they have to extend it. And understand this. Can you imagine the flack and the heat that Dina Hinshaw is going under right now for doing what she did by raising the restrictions? She's probably got a gun to her head right now. And I'm not kidding. Like, she's probably got a gun to her head. Understand that these people may be thinking they're in a job, but she has a code of ethics that she has to follow too. And that's why she released and rescinded the mandates. We also have people who have been charged on the same day with me, who were found guilty on their tickets. And then all of a sudden, my court date comes up, and 3 days later, their tickets have been rescinded. I have the document right here where it says that her case has been overturned without her even going into court. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, this is happening. And whether you believe it or not, whether you believe that I had anything to do with it, is moot. I don't care. This documentation is out there. The evidence is out there. This stuff is on the record. It's there. Now, to come down on somebody for trying, you're just a sad human being. And for anybody who wants to denounce or detract or defame somebody for trying their hardest to save humanity, you're a sick individual.
Did Rebel reach out to you to have an interview or anything at all?
Of course they did.
And you just refused it?
Why would I give an interview to somebody who's trying to destroy me and is only going on half the court documents? That's a really piss poor interview process. That's horrible journalism. And I don't care. I will not work with somebody who's going to do with that. If you would have asked me first before putting out the hit piece, then absolutely I would have said, yeah, let's go on. Let's get it straight on the record. But you did a hit piece before you even talked to me. And I never once said I won. I never once, and I never have in any interview I've done. I think this is interview 283 across the world. And I have never once said I won. And I never will, because the winning of this, win or loss, it never mattered.
Yeah.
It was what we were able to get on the record. And that's what people need to concentrate on. Now, the next person that goes and does this, which I cannot wait, is going to vindicate me. And it's going to go, because we already know that the judges want to hang him. They want him, and they're going to give him his challenge. And just watch what happens. Sit back, grab a bucket of popcorn, hold on, and watch what's about to happen, gentlemen and ladies.
Chris, we're gonna probably start to wind things down here. So maybe if you got some final questions.
No, I mean, before we go, and I think probably the biggest and most important thing currently for me, and Pat has already touched on it a little bit earlier, you know, it's all about the empowerment of people right now. People really need to take responsibility for themselves and stop thinking that they're going to be saved by lawyers, politicians, and other people within the freedom movement that are going to speak out for them so they don't have to do anything. It's not going to be like that. And where you were saying before, Pat, about the availability of sets of questions that people now have to counteract the offer from the employer to take a vaccine, we can make that list readily available to people, can't we? And people can then use this template to then go back to their employer completely lawfully and certainly completely legitimately to challenge what they're saying and at least ask the right questions before they're coerced into taking an experimental vaccine that we know has had some horrendous consequences for people, death and adverse reactions. So you have that list of questions. We're able to get that out to the public now so they can start using this, especially as it seems to be ramped up.
Yeah, 100%. And that is my, I'll say it right now. That is the only thing I can do in being who I am. I'm just a guy. I'm just an average guy who he thinks outside the box. He asks questions, doesn't believe what's being told to him. And the one thing I want to really stress is the reason why I do what I do. I've lost 2 best friends to death by suicide through this. My own 2 children have been given the vaccination, and that's another story for another day. But at the same time, you see this flag behind me. Those men and women who passed away in the course of battle in World War II and World War I to give us the rights and freedoms that we have. It is your God-given right as a citizen of your country to stand up and uphold those rights and exercise those rights and hold these government officials accountable. And the definition, and I swear, my hold this status very proud. I am a Canadian patriot. That is my logo across all my platforms. And the definition of a patriot is a citizen who defends its people against its government. And that's what we are doing. We are trying to defend the citizens of Canada against this government who does not give a crap about you. They have a different agenda that they are implementing. And in the next 5 years, even less, we are going to see a Canada we will never recognize again.
Yeah. So, Christine, any final words from you before we go?
Oh, just thank you for helping get the word out. And thank you, Pat. And someone actually emailed me that list of questions and I didn't know it had anything to do with Pat. It just was forwarded to me. So I already sent it to my brother and
Yeah,
it's going to be really great. So I did read it and it was awesome. So great job.
Those questions have definitely snowballed around the world. I've given them to everybody. They are accessible on my pages and stuff. And I have the PDF. I also have it in Word document. So anybody who wants to get a hold of me and get those, I know it's touring around. I've actually seen a video now of somebody else who brought the questions up and now they're using those questions and empowering people. And that's what this is about. Stand up, people. Take the power back, put it back in your hands and ask those questions everybody else is afraid to ask.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And we'll provide those, like I said, we'll provide those in the show notes as well for these videos and the podcast audio. What about you, Chris? Any final thoughts from you before we leave, sign off?
No, I think we're at a turning point right now where if we do something and people start standing up, it's getting to a stage now where it's getting beyond ridiculous. They're doing things to people that shouldn't be done. And it's time for humanity to actually get off the knees, stand up, take responsibility and do something about it before it gets too far down the road and it becomes too late for salvaging anything. This is, we're standing up here, we're the adults here, we're fighting not only for our own freedoms, but for the future of our children and our grandchildren. And if people can't feel that burden and the weight of that on their shoulders now and still refuse to do anything, I've got no time for them whatsoever. They're to me are part of the problem. The information's out there. We're providing the information. There's a lot of people out there coming forward and providing the knowledge. And I said today, the past 18 months has been an IQ test for people. And it just seems that not too many people have done too well on that IQ test. It's time to wake up, everyone. Otherwise, you're going to suffer very, very bad things which are coming in the future.